All right. So for this part of the work session, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the expenditure side of the equation. And so with the budget, the way that it's shaped up right now, it's got several positions proposed for FY20, but I wanted to kind of go through them so that you could have an understanding of the impact of them and where they're coming from. So the firefighter paramedics is the last round of hiring that really allows the fire department to build out their full staffing model for opening the new station. That lets them get up to full staffing for the command staff side, and then based on a retirement at some point that's coming up, we would look at having 4th Battalion Chief as a reclassification that would allow for a float. So you've got some vacation coverage and people get exposure to the different facilities. We're proposing a lead communication operator position for the communications division, and 2 park utility maintenance 2s. That's an increase from 2 permanent part-time to 2 full-time. But I wanted to talk a little bit about more detail about that so you kind of understood what was driving it. For years, I don't even know how many, Marion has had a contract with an outside firm to do a lot of our right-of-way maintenance. So all the city flower beds, the medians, everything like that. We were not able to come to terms on a successor contract with that group, and so Mike's staff ended up taking that over internally, and based on what he's observed for workload, rather than go out for another contract at $40,000 plus, he's looking to upgrade these 2 positions to be able to take those hours and allocate it over to completing those tasks. So that would be done more in-house. Between the 2 upgrades, these are permanent part-time ones that already were eligible for medical insurance anyway. So you're looking at about a $30,000 to $32,000 increase for making that change. I think the last year of our contract for those outside services, it was at least $40,000, if not $42,000, was right. 40. Okay. The accountant position that's proposed on here is actually a reallocation of resources from the Director of Administrative Services position. As we've worked through the way that the organization was working and how things were constituted after Ellsworth's departure, I really took a look at whether or not it was time to start moving towards what the council would have seen as stage 2 of the implementation of the reorganization. And so as part of that, we'll be bringing finance back out as a separate department. Leanne is going to be the finance director. IT will be moving out, and Terrell will become the IT director. And rather than filling that DAS position, we'll be reconfiguring administrative services and city manager, and then proposing a new accountant position. So this is not one that I would say is going to be drawing against more money than it was in the current budget year. The whole idea is what we were allocating towards the wages and benefits for the DAS position is being repurposed in the coming budget to allow us to add another accountant position in the finance side. Originally, I had hoped to be able to add some resources to the human resources side, but the way the draft budget shaped up, we just were not able to keep that one in there.
So the accountant position, that would reside in the finance department?
Right.
Okay, so that would be assistance for Leanne.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the police civilian property and evidence clerk, that's a repurposing of a position that's out there right now. Right now, the evidence position is staffed by an officer. So it's a sworn position, you know, in Joe's terms, it's someone with a badge and a gun that's managing all of our evidence. And that does not need to be a sworn officer. So by backfilling that position and allowing for it to be civilianized, it lets the chief take one of his current complement of patrol officers and repurpose that and actually move it over more into what I would consider to be a higher value task based on their training and background. You've got somebody that's fully trained in police work. Why are we just having them manage evidence when that could be done by a civilian position? So it lets us increase and better utilize the officers that we have by backfilling that civilian position. So the total cost to the general fund for all of those is a little over $444,000. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that the general fund deficit is in the that's in the current draft is in the $470,000 range. All of our, the deficit is largely being driven by what we're proposing for new positions. Now, I'm fully confident that between the first draft and the second draft, we're going to be able to narrow that gap a lot. So we'll be able to do some of that without making a bunch of other changes. But I just wanted the council to kind of see that. The reason I wanted to dive in this in a little more detail is to help you understand that, the positions in parks really are ones that I would consider to be expense neutral, because that was contract work that's now going to be done in-house. The accountant position is a repurposing of a position that's already currently in the budget. So that's not what I would consider to be new money. So the new positions that are being proposed are all in the public safety arena. And so just so that you understand that that's where the allocation of resources and the priority for what I would consider new money positions is included in here. The other position that we haven't filled yet in the current budget year, because it's revenue contingent, the additional inspector position, is also intended to be a quote-unquote new money position where it's contingent on being able to increase those fees for the housing licenses and housing inspections to be able to make it self-sufficient. As for the position that we're in right now, as I alluded to earlier on the revenue side, the amount of money that it takes in natural growth in valuation over time is sufficient to fund our current complement of positions. So whenever we start talking about new positions, they have to have either a different revenue source, or the council has to give us guidance on where your priorities lie for what money should be allocated towards each particular position. And I know there have been some questions before about the timing of things like the firefighter and paramedics and when those positions are actually hired. Sometimes that's driven by the needs in a particular budget so that we don't want to overspend, but most often it's actually driven by when can we bring those positions on. For example, in the current budget year, we would have actually hired the current complement of firefighters earlier, but we don't have anywhere to put them. So with this, we're trying to time it towards when the new fire station would actually open so that we have a place for them to actually reside and have the crew stationed. You look at when it would be likely to open, we're talking FY21, when the station is actually up and running for a full fiscal year. Then we need to be able to have the firefighters tied to when we're going to need them to man the station.
Lon, on a couple of these things, I just want to hit this category here a little bit. Lead communication operator here. So do we have communications then under its own line item, or is that still being departmentalized out of police? Can you explain what that's going to look like going forward, and what I guess currently how it's being operated right now?
Yeah, it's being operated right in the current budget. It would show on the police line items. We have some work to do to be able to separate that out, to be able to show it within as its own division. Where I would see it is because it's going to be kind of unique. It's amongst all of the functions that we do, it's the only one where you actually have council members and multiple staff members, including 2 department heads that are on the oversight board for that. So in future years, we'll break it out and it will show as a division. I'm not 100% sure as we hone in on what the budget does and how it looks, if it will break it out as its own department. But in the past, when we've had ones that were functional divisions, like you could have looked in prior year budgets and seen communications as a division of the city manager's office, where it would have had more detailed line items associated with that particular function, even if it wasn't broken out as its own department. It's a little bit difficult in this one when you have communications, but they have a board that includes the fire chief and the police chief. It's just a new concept for us. We have not yet gotten to the point, though, where we can break out from the police department budget, well, how much of their paper budget and office supplies and everything is going towards communications versus is going towards patrol and investigations functions. That'll be one of our tasks for the next year, is to fully break that out so that council can see, what are we spending discreetly on communications versus
So going forward, you're kind of thinking then, and it would be 2021 before we would see any action on that, right? Or is it in your yeah, and then you would take a look at allocating, obviously, the times being allocated to that, kind of like what you were saying, a little bit of your salary goes to each one of the departments. We would do the same thing again towards the communications.
Since it's already in the general fund, all that would really do is kind of move it from one line item to another. Versus the proprietary funds, which have an entirely separate budget. I wouldn't preclude the idea of maybe making that change mid-year as we get some more clarity on that, but I don't want to give Leanne too many gray hairs in her first full year as finance director, so we'll just have to see how that makes its way into the chart of accounts. But that would be our intent, is to be able to separate that out, show what those expenses are related to communications as a separate function in the city of Marion versus police and fire and everything else.
So that, you're right. So then other than them just physically being in their facility, though, there would be no, I don't want to say responsibilities of the PD, but it would not be part of their reflected budget. It would be a complete separate category, right?
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. As we move down here, obviously we've been hearing that there was a big need for, I'm surprised that we're not seeing additional staffing for the PD side. You've got on here, we're taking somebody from the evidence and moving them over to the PD side, and I would assume and understanding from what we've been listening to that they need a year out as well too. Obviously, from the date of hire to the time that they get on the street, it's another year, just like the fire department, right? So firefighter is on probation for a year. Thoughts on that? I guess I'm shocked. I thought there would be at least one police officer on there for at least the 2020 budget, but
yeah, with this one, when I looked at that, one of the advantages of going with the civilian evidence clerk is that that's an individual that's already certified. They've already been through the academy, so it's not a case where you hire somebody and then you lose them automatically for the first 12 weeks of their employment because they have to go over there and get trained. So it's one where, you can do some more training to get them back. Maybe you have to do some stuff to get them out on the street to get them reacclimated to that.
That's
my
question. Is that someone that's going to be actually on the street?
That would be up to the
Okay.
chief.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to clarify that.
Yep. And I'm not necessarily opposed to adding it, but when we were putting the budget together and we're already showing that it, at least in current form, it has a structural deficit of almost $500,000, and adding that other officer would push it over $500,000, start getting a little bit reluctant on where can we go structurally, where can we go with our revenues. I know that there's a strategic plan out there for the police department. All other departments have needs as well. As we move forward on developing what I'd call our human capital plan, so that we have that long-term strategy on what our hiring looks like, we're going to be able to tie that back to estimates of resources. The compensation study that I talked about before will be a big piece of that, because as I shared with all of the leadership team yesterday, is that we've been able to hone it down to the point that we now know what is the impact of what's the impact of 1% on pay for performance, and what can those resources go back towards. What does it look like when you've got union contracts that have a 2.95% pay increase? What does that do towards your overall budget? Because when I talk about that growth in the general fund from year to year, that just for the existing staff, you've got to have a 3.4 to 3.7% increase in net valuation. It's only when you outstrip that you have the ability to contemplate adding additional staff without raising taxes or raising fees or looking at some of these other strategies that we're talking about. I firmly believe that as we construct these budgets going forward, we really have to diversify our revenue sources so that we're not as dependent on property taxes. Marion, as a growing community, we're never going to be able to get to the point where, for example, property taxes, say, are 50% of the general fund budget, but we can make some headway on that and tie it specifically to individual departments or individual functions that we'd like. That's why when we talk about things like the franchise fee, if we're going to dedicate those towards public safety, the council could say, we would like to do 4% or I think you can even do 3.5. There are other options in there if you wanted to tie that to be able to increase what we put towards specific functions. At the same time, what I'm asking departments to do is when we're talking about using data and analytics to be able to show to you as a council what do we get for making that additional investment. It's all well and good to be able to say, well, we need to add X number of people, I'm going to pick on Chief Crable here, in the fire department. All right, we know that by adding the third fire station, we can map out and model what that's going to do for response times across the community. But when you look at making those investments, I think we need to be able to articulate to the public, what does that really mean? For example, if we add 3 patrol officers, does that mean that the Tier 2 calls now, instead of having a 9-minute queue time, are going to be a 7-minute queue time? What does that actually mean? Because we don't want to have a budget that rewards activities. We want a budget that rewards outcomes. Because if the council's outcome that you desire, you're the ones that set the level of service. Level of service should never be determined by the department, because you're the ones that tie back to the community and tell us what the community's expectations are. And if the community expects a firefighter to be able to respond to a fire at their house in 6 minutes or less, then we know how many stations we need. We know how close they need to be towards particular homes. But the other pieces of it, we don't, as I said, we don't want to be in a position where we're simply rewarding activities. We want to be rewarding outcomes.
And I totally appreciate that. And I've been looking at some numbers as well too, and I've been kind of mapping out where our payroll dollars have been going since we've been doing our pay for performance, and the numbers are staggering. When we're dealing with 5, 6, 7, 8% increases, when you're dealing with $100,000 salary, those percentages mean a big difference. Mm-hmm. From my practical mind, I totally appreciate and respect what decisions have been made up to this point too. I'm just a little bit of the out-of-the-box thinker, thinking, when we do have Prospect Meadows come online, when we do have these I'm thinking out a year and a half as well. And in those critical pieces, we can't just hire off the street because we're not set up that way, which is a whole different discussion. I'd like to overhaul the way we do our recruiting and hiring and what the pay scales work and so forth, because there's a lot of talent that's out there that we can bring in and bypass all of those startup fees and costs associated with it too. So I'm just a little concerned. Again, I'm a huge supporter of public safety, and I know everybody knows that, but when I just see an influx of 1,500 or 2,000 people in our community and the additional needs that are going to be needed on a daily basis, I worry about that, and I'm concerned about that. If there were compromises to be made in there, when we take a look at the budgets and overall we know what the exact dollars are going to be from each one of these categories, does our staff have the capability of making decisions or opportunities to give something up to get something back? I know you can't take a fixed cost or expense. For example, last night we just approved, $250,000 for cameras. I know we can't give that up, but do they have that lateral movement to bring on a payroll position that will be an expense, obviously, ongoing? That's not a one and done purchase. And I'm sorry to be direct with this. It's a learning curve for me as to actually, I'm a big component of labor, and I just want to understand that a little bit more, because I know you know that, we all know that, we're trying to do within our means, but at the end of the day, can concessions be made to move laterally with some of those topics?
That's something we always really do take a look at, and it's really one of our priorities for the coming year, is to start to better utilize some of the tools that we already have to help lessen workloads on existing staff, and really look at opportunities to use technology to either forestall the need to add people or to let us repurpose positions that we've already got. So for example, when you look at our current software packages, in the general fund, one of the proposals is to roll out a suite that's called ExecuTime. It's a module of our core enterprise software program of New World. And what that package does is it allows for scheduling, which right now the police department does a lot of that work manually, but it also really automates payroll. It allows you to use time clocks for hourly employees. It has components and modules in it for the salaried employees as well. So a lot of the things that are being done manually or being done through Excel will be handled through the software package. So once you do that, what does that really mean then that we need for staff support for that position going forward? There are other components in there that we know that just by better utilizing what we have, we can free up a lot of time. I know that the staff's probably gotten tired of hearing me talk about the hold harmless process, but for our hold harmless form that the council sees on occasion when they're asking for a noise permit, right now that gets routed to, the old process is that got routed to everybody. Well, who's really interested in somebody that wants to put a dumpster on the street? I don't know that Parks is. It certainly isn't something that impacts me or the finance director. So when you talk about streamlining processes like that, you can gain a lot just simply from looking at how you do business and eliminating the things that the lean process would call waste, because they're unnecessary touches, things that don't add value to it. We're going to be able to do some of that with our stronger initiatives. And frankly, one of the suggestions that was made from staff is, like the police department is starting to really, I keep having to look this way to see Joe, is using data and analytics to start to drive their deployment of resources. As we move that direction, they're going to be able to assign their people to what would be considered the high-value tasks. So rather than doing, for example, just general traffic enforcement around the community, they can focus in on intersections or areas of streets that are dangerous or where we have problems and better use those resources. The ultimate extension of that is, do you start to look in some of those areas, or school zones? Do we implement traffic cameras in school zones instead and use technology instead of having to have that type of stuff done by an officer? To really control costs and build a sustainable budget in the future, we have to look at all of those alternatives. One of the technologies that the chief had evaluated is a new fast attack vehicle for fire suppression that I think the council has seen some information on. There's a community in Iowa that has bought one of those now. You bring that kind of stuff forward, the traditionalists hate it. But if it's being effectively used by NASA and the military, you have to seriously look at the implementation of that technology. There are things out there that can transform how services are delivered. The other example I'll give you is this is a policy level discussion for the city council. The building code right now would require every residential home to be sprinklered. Now, that would add $3,000 to $5,000 to the cost of a new house. But if you sprinkle a residential unit, now all of a sudden your response time for fire can be 15 minutes instead of 6 minutes. So where's the investment? Because every time we hire a firefighter, we're anticipating we're going to have them for their entire career. But think about the impact that that has on the level of resources that are needed to provide that specific service. So, Marion alters the building code to take that stuff out. We have provisions in there for how big a house has to be before that requirement kicks in. But those are policy decisions. When I talk about the level of service and the expectations, those are the kind of decisions that councils make that really drive those numbers in the future. I know some of the folks don't like to hear that, but that's absolutely true. If we were to go out and bond for $5 million and put sprinklers in every residential property in every building in Marion, what does that do to the future response needs of the fire service? Doesn't hit the medical side, but running a medical primary service is very different than running a fire primary service, because right now we run a fire primary service. And then medical is just an additional service we're able to offer by better utilizing those resources.
So kind of coming back around to the same question, as I take a look at the other titled positions that we're adding in here, like, for example, Human Resources Director, is that now we would have 2 Human Resources employees?
Yep. That's not in this draft.
No, that's been removed?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, my apologies, I misunderstood.
it was on the sheet, but it's not in the budget.
Okay.
So I'll make one comment, follow up your comment and Randy's. I know we're going to talk about it in the future. But again, having come and managed a business where you had to cut back and reduce your workforce, anytime you go through that once and you got to reduce your workforce by any significant amount, in the future you will do everything you need to do to make sure you don't have to do that again. One, that's being very cautionary on when you add employees and being very tough about it. and managers don't always like to hear that. You need to have very good specific criteria on what it takes to add a person, and it sounds like we're putting that into place. And three, I think what you're talking about is you find ways to become more efficient, to reduce the need for some of those employees by investing in a one-time cost of technology or procedures rather than ongoing cost of personnel that are there every year in the future. So, you know, I understand exactly what Randy's saying, but I think some of the direction you're going in is correct. And if I can add one more question, when we're talking about personnel, on the sheet in here, it's talked about city attorney. It says it'll be added if cost neutral. That's talked about for fiscal year 19. And I'm asking what the status of that is for thinking, because on our contracts legal services line, that's reduced or cut in half for the budget year. So do those coincide, match, or how are those related?
Yeah, we're working on that analysis now because there's two components to it. One is we have agreements with attorneys on retainer where we get a certain number of hours and then they bill us at an hourly rate for hours outside of that. So when I look at the two contracts for that case that would be impacted the most, that would be Kara Bullerman's and Ryan Tang's.
Right.
Between those two contracts, there's about $100,000. So what we were missing is I didn't have data yet on what's the going rate, what's the expected range to hire a city attorney, how does bringing someone on staff, how will it impact? I know it would impact the retainer agreements. The retainer agreements, those two would likely be completely eliminated. But what does it do then to the hourly ones that were being billed for outside of the scope of the retainer agreements? How much of a reduction can we expect to see in that? It wouldn't affect some of the other ones that we have, which would be the police department uses a separate attorney for their prosecutions. We have bills. We use Dorsey and Whitney for our tax increment financing
Right.
stuff. And then we have Lynch Dallas that does some of our HR work and also does union bargaining and negotiations. So I'm trying to look at what does it do to the scope of the regular city attorney work versus what we're doing now at an hourly rate to make
You'd
sure there's
likely
balance.
still farm out complex litigation,
Yeah.
maybe not the small stuff, but
Yeah, and a lot of the
So-
complex litigation, I mean, if we're being litigated against, usually that's covered by ICAP. So we have an amount that we have to pay. I don't remember what our deductible is, but we
Yeah.
pay the deductible and then they step in and take over. But it's the things like if you go to arbitration. Well, if you go to arbitration on a union negotiation, that's going to be $12,000 to $15,000 that you just can't avoid. And then having a staff attorney, there's the core services that would need to be provided, drafting ordinances, doing resolutions, doing legal research. We know that would be folded in-house, but then it's a question of how much additional capacity would they have by virtue of working for us all day, every week. What else could they pick up? Could they start to pick up real estate? Could we start to develop some expertise in some things like condemnation that we're currently contracting out for? That's part of the analysis we have to complete.
So I understand we'd always have quite a bit of other ongoing legal costs because of all the different attorneys that we use that you described. But since we do not have a city attorney in the budget from a personnel standpoint, why was that line item cut in half? That's what if the salary is not in there for the person, the line item was cut in half, and I'm trying to understand why.
That I'd have to take a further look at.
Yeah, I can use this. Oh, what I did, Councilmember Jensen's, when I put it in there, I put it in the budget right now as if we were going to move forward with that in FY19 as we're doing the analysis, meaning if we decide in the second round that we're not getting close to that number, we would be putting back in the retainer. But right now, that's what I placed it in there.
But it's
as
not
modeling
cost
with the
neutral
cost.
because you took the expense out, but the salary's not in there, is it?
On the salary side,
Is there a salary in somewhere else?
I believe so. Let me double check because it should be.
Probably in
Because
City Hall.
that's-
Is it in City Hall's budget or in?
I don't know.
Let me bring it up. I believe I do have it in there because I think when I put it in there, I put it in the 19 side. So
So it would have carried forward from 19, probably under city manager.
Oh, so there is. All right.
And I apologize for not calling it out in that way to make it more transparent on the change for that.
So can you just let us know where that is, what line item the salary's included? Okay.
Can I ask something? With this, is there a way to have like an index of where what's at in here and page numbers and stuff? I don't know, that was discussed a little bit. I don't know what.
Handed that out Thursday night.
And me,
And Nick.
Oh, well, that'll be easier.
I'm just cheating off Steve here. I don't need it now, I'm fine. I found my spot in here, but in the
What's
old
this?
version. Oh, perfect, thanks.
And to answer your question, Councilmember Jensen, yes, I just looked in there, and I have it in there as their total salary would be $102,000 in the next year's budget, and then the fully annualized cost would be $135 and change.
What line
for
item is that
position.
on?
That would be broken up into all the different line items for the city manager's office.
Okay, it's under city manager?
Correct. And one of the other things just to mention too is the allocation method for the city manager's office. Most of the positions are allocated 60% to the general fund, and then they're split to the other proprietary funds. So I didn't give you a position by position breakdown of all the 200 and some odd positions in there, but it is currently included in the budget. So if this is something as we're going forward, I just wanted to have it modeled. If we're going to go forward with it and we believe it can go forward with it, we can include it in the budget as a plan to go forward with. Or if not, we can then remove it out, and then we'd also remove out, as you're mentioning, the other side of it. So it's,
That's fine, I didn't
covered.
yeah,
yeah, good question.
I understand the give and take.
So what's gonna drive the decision of going forward with it? Is if it's cost neutral?
If it's cost neutral, and we can see a benefit in level of service internally for being able to do that, I just, having someone that's available literally 40 hours a week to do nothing but city business, I think there'd be some benefit on turnaround times and response times on some of those pieces too.
So would they be exclusive to the city, in the city, receive all city benefits, or are we talking about a salaried position, tech exempt?
It'd be an exempt salaried position, but it would be a city employee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a professional grade position.
What about that?
Yeah, I can see the benefit of having somebody available at your disposal to answer all the questions. I think it just would take a really good search to find someone that has all the areas of expertise to make it really worthwhile, so you're not still going outside for every little area of expertise.
Yeah, and it's something that I think we've been on the cusp of for a while. If you look at our legal services budget, it has gone up. We're a bigger city. We've got more legal questions coming up. We have, now, not all of that has been exclusive to what I'd consider to be your general legal expenses. Some of that has been driven by the economic development arena with tax increment financing. But the mayor's correct. Those other pieces that we have specialized attorneys for, whether it's labor negotiations, whether it's police, whether it's tax increment financing, those are not going to go away. But like in the case of tax increment financing, for example, we view that, it's not really, now, calling it neutral might be a little bit of an overstatement, but we do allocate those costs back out to the benefiting projects and the benefiting TIF districts. So the TIF districts pay for the cost of the TIF attorneys, for example.
I mean, yeah, some of those specialties, you just need somebody that's all they do, which is like the TIF work or bond counsel or, I don't know.
Yeah, there's too many areas in there where there's too many pitfalls for someone who's more of a generalist that they might not necessarily know about. There's just more risk.
Yeah, like the employment lawyers.
Special.
So then the other positions that are proposed are ones that are coming out of the utility or proprietary funds. I touched on the arborist tech for the urban forest utility. Right now we have our city arborist and one arborist tech position. They do work as part of the overall crew for the Parks Department, so it's not as though they don't have additional support if they need some help for a particular project, but this would add one more dedicated person to that function. We would expect them then to be able to complete more work in-house, in addition to normal maintenance work, to be able to do more work in-house with the response to the Emerald ash borer. So we'd be looking at that one, as I stated, that we'd draw against fund balance for that position, at least initially, knowing that we would end up having to do an increase to the urban forest fee at some point to make it more self-sufficient. This is just an area as we grow and as we get bigger and have more parks and have more open space under the city's purview. It's going to require more maintenance, and we're just trying to build for it and plan for it for the future. The equipment operator in road use generally is driven by the number of road miles that you're responsible for, and as Marion continues to grow, if we expect to maintain our current standards of service, then we need to make sure that we have the appropriate number of personnel to be able to maintain those. So it's not unusual to have to add those positions periodically into the utility functions, whether it happens to be in sewer because you've added X number of miles of sewer, or in solid waste because you've added a significant number of new houses that you have to pick up. It's just basically driven by that level of demand. I think I had covered this one already to hopefully help the council understand what we were looking at doing with completing the realignment of duties in the wake of the vacancy in the Department of Administrative Services position. What I didn't get into with that is that as part of that, we'll be moving a couple of functions that were under Administrative Services over into the city manager's office. So Zach, instead of being in the finance department, the budget manager will be in the city manager's side. Communications will be in the city manager's side. Clerk will be in the city manager's side. And finance will be more strictly finance and accounting functions housed there. IT then will come out as its own department and have its own staff, and Tara will be responsible for that one. So just a recap on where we're sitting at with general fund revenues. As we're sitting right now, the general fund revenues are projected at just a hair over 24.5 million, with all those different components that go into it. The biggest ones being, of course, property tax, and then transfers in with the employee benefits levy. It's filtered through another fund and then transfers into the general fund. Projected significant collections in franchise fees, and then continued significant collections in building permit fees. The new proposals would include that revenue target for the annual licensing fees for rental units with the revamp of that program. Now, expenditures, this is consistent across all the different funds. They break out into several different categories. Salaries, the cost of benefits, staff development, that's your training and travel budgets, repair and maintenance, operating, which would be part of your operating expenses, contractual services, what do we not do in-house that we pay for. In addition to things like legal, we do contract out for some other services, so like City Hall and the library have contracts for custodial services, for example. Then we have commodities, the things that we buy and consume for either daily use or for use for the services that we would provide. Think like in the Parks Department, the things that they would provide for consumables for recreational programs. Capital outlay, that would be for purchases that don't rise to the level of being able to hit the CIP, and then transfers. Transfers in the general fund are pretty extensive, usually around $700,000 or more. That's our sinking fund transfer that goes into equipment replacement for future replacement of equipment, so that every year we're not trying to budget out of operating funds for up and down expenditures every year, because you don't replace the same amount of equipment or the same piece of equipment every year. So the police department, on pages 11 to 14, PD is the single biggest department in the general fund. And right now, under the current budget, is proposed to raise about $370,000 in expenditures over the current year budget. So expenditures are up about 4.6%. Revenue is projected to go down. That's a reflection of some of the reprioritization of tasks in the department and a refocusing on what they were using personnel to do. It does propose the new communications operator and the new civilian evidence clerk position. Questions on that one? One thing I would say that for the general fund is that overall this year, we really aren't proposing any major new initiatives other than some of these incremental staff additions. It really is what I would consider to be pretty much a maintenance budget going forward, and then funding some stranded commitments from prior years. And then the executime that I talked about before is really the only thing that I think rises to the level of a major initiative in the overall budget. There's some operational changes that might be proposed and some tweaks here and there, but in essence, it doesn't make a lot of changes from last year.
Did you have a question?
Well, it says pages 11 through 14, but
Oh, yeah.
it says pages 11 through 14, but I don't see anything for.
Actually stops on 13, I think.
Yeah. I don't see anything on 17 either. Unless that's all engineering.
I guess I'm going to speak up. I'm on board with everything with PD, with the exception I would like to see a couple more police officers. I just, I can't get past the fact that we talk about, bringing on equipment operators and others and maintaining levels of service. I'll be the only one to cast that voice, Lon, to say, I think in order to keep maintaining level of service as we see that fluctuation of population come into town, I think the department's done a great job on restructuring and recategorizing who and where at what level they need to be. It's probably 10 years overdue from where it should have been, but I think we got to start preparing for that increase that we need to move forward with. Even if today we said yes, we're dealing with 12, 13 months from now before somebody actually comes on, and that's our nutrition process. And I'm sorry I'm picking on the police department, but I'm sure we got people who are going to be retiring. Same thing in all of our departments. So by the time we got people in training, I think we're behind the 8 ball, personally. But I just want, for the record, I want that to be stated, I guess. I just feel like...
And you're incorrect saying you're the only one, because I'm sitting here thinking, looking at all this, I'm a bit surprised that there isn't anything for the police department, for additional police staffing. I was just surprised. I thought that there would be something.
When I first saw it, I thought, oh, there's not a police officer being hired?
Yeah, now,
It's just an
But,
observation.
I mean, maybe there's a good reason, and you can explain that. I mean, and
Well-
I just didn't know what the right time was to bring that up, but
no, and that's fine. It's just, every other position that I'm proposing in the budget is either a restructuring of existing resources or has a piece of revenue tied to it in order to be able to propose that. We had the stranded commitment to the fire department to be able to fully staff that facility.
And that's
If you look
absolutely-
in prior years, that commitment goes away the following fiscal year because they'll be fully up and running. And so there should be, assuming continued good growth in the property tax base, room in future fiscal years. But that $400,000 deficit that's shown in there right now is almost entirely driven by the public safety positions that we're adding. So it's a question of how much more do you want that deficit to grow? Because, if a police officer position, yes, the first year salary might be $45,000, but by the time you put all the salary and benefits on it, and it's an $85,000 a year positions, 2 more increases that deficit to $600,000. And at what point, is the council going to be comfortable and start, throwing things at me for not preparing and giving to you what I think is a sustainable operating budget? Honestly, the way the budget shapes up right now, and I don't think this will be a surprise to the staff, is if we aren't able to substantially close that gap, either through really combing through our operating expenses and taking a fine-tooth comb to them and then increasing revenues in other areas, my recommendation would be is that we take a year moratorium on hiring in the following fiscal year budget to let our base reset and then look at FY22 where growth would have caught up to those stranded commitments, and then we could look at launching into more of a hiring position. But all of the other ones either have a direct revenue source tied to it, like the inspector position, or they're a repurposing of expenses that are already in the budget. Every penny of new dollars is going towards public safety already. Now, you're the ones that have to tell us what you're comfortable doing. If you're okay with adding more to that, I am too. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm just trying to make sure that we are not constructing a budget that won't be sustainable, as Councilman Jensen said, to where all of a sudden we hire a couple of new people and then we have a 2% growth year, and now we're going back to those people that have been on board with us for 8 months and saying, sorry, your job's gone. Because I don't think that's the position that we want to put the city in either.
And I totally agree, and I appreciate, and please don't take my comments as being directed to you, because you're
No, it's
working
okay.
with a lot of numbers, and I would like to think that you're not taking them. It's just, it's a very passionate part of my side. I have no problems justifying to anybody on the street that I led the vote to hire additional staff. I'll fight that battle all day long. I'd rather see us do that than to repair the next road that needs to be repaired. I truly feel that. I know our call volume's up. I know we've got retirements coming up, and I feel like even if we go out to do a hire, again, we hire somebody on and bring them on, we're probably just going to end up replacing the next one that retired going out, so we're still behind the 8 ball. So just for the record, I mean, that I would like to see I would like to see 1 or 2 officers pulled into this, and we'll figure it out later. I mean, that's kind of what we do with this process. But all due respect, these are great, but I know we're restructuring internally City Hall, and to look at, say, we put these couple positions on, but we're missing in maybe some key areas. So anyway, you'll take it and do what you want, and I appreciate that. So thanks for allowing me to speak that a little bit, Lon.
Anybody else have any opinions on that?
I do, and I mean no disrespect to other departments, but in my mind, adding, and no disrespect to the finance department, adding a police officer over an accountant seems to me more important, just because of the, like you say, the growth of the city and the call volume, and I get it's a tricky one, it's a tough one. I understand.
Yeah, and when we look at these, we do take a look. If a department has an opening and we've got a retirement or something like that, we've been taking a look at that and saying, is that the best allocation of our resources? One of the questions we ask a lot of the departments is that still the position that you need? Have your needs changed? Does it need to be an upgrade? Is this going to be something that could be better repurposed to be something else? But, as much, and just to give you some perspective on the accountant position, yes, police call volumes have changed quite a bit. But for those of you with an accounting background, if you were to go back 5 years and look at the number of governmental accounting standards that cities have to meet, you can go back 5 years and there might have been 20 of them. Now there's literally hundreds of them. And so a lot of what we have to do and a lot of the things that they have to do to keep us getting clean audits and make sure that we're compliant fall into the accounting department. And so I can't turn around and say we're going to add a bunch of staff to this department without adding the support staff to be able to make that piece work. And if you were to look historically at where positions had been added to the city over the years, they had been added to public services, to police, to fire, to parks, to other positions. But if you were to look at the finance staff, it's been almost virtually unchanged as far as the number of people that we have in there, despite that huge additional workload being created. So again, that's one that I looked at and said, okay, this position is coming off the books. Where do we really need to allocate those resources? Because the other thing that we have to worry about there is, Leanne, please don't get sick, is what happens if you have someone who's not available? Who else does it fall back to? And right now, we have a second CPA in payroll. We have another person that's studied for CPA. I don't know if we've heard if he's passed every component or not. But we have to have that cross-training so that if someone gets removed from the equation, car accident, whatever it is, that we can still function as an organization. So it's harder to tell the story about why those support operations are critical, but that's part of what I have to look at when I propose those. You know, if I'm looking at the budget right now, and I think a lot of folks in the room would agree with me, is that I don't know that I could even overstate the role that IT plays in allowing this city to continue to operate. Because so much of what we do is dependent on that software functioning in the background and being able to keep that running. And that affects every department, from being able to keep the mobile data terminals in the squad cars up and running, to be able to process bills, to be able to bring people on. There is so much that we can do in that arena that, you know, you could put additional resources towards that and potentially get just as much yield as you can by adding some of these other positions. But that's what I'm trying to balance when I'm looking at these. I mean, I have nothing but respect for the jobs that our public safety officials do. I just feel like it's my role to help try to provide some balance to that, because quite literally, it's like looking at the CIP, that if you're not diligent and don't try to provide some balance, you could spend every penny that you've got on fixing streets. It's just like that in the general fund, that if you don't look at those other pieces that help those entities that are front-facing function more efficiently, you could spend every penny that you have on public safety functions.
Just to kind of
And it's
expand
not-
on that. Oops, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I totally understand that it's not a easy position that you're in, and it's a very difficult thing to have to do. But I was just the question came to my mind as I'm looking at all this. I was just expecting that there would be additional police positions, but I mean,
No, and if you as the council say, let's model the second draft, we'd like to see what it looks like with a couple of positions added, and then let's see what that does when you do your next comb through, and what we end up with as a deficit in the general fund, and how do we project that we could potentially close that. I'm more than happy to do that. I just want to know that that's a priority for the entire council.
sure.
Kind of going back a little bit at how we were talking a little bit about services provided. For example, our arborist Tech 1 that we're looking at here, and from the Parks Department, are we providing services to residences, or again, I'm looking for avenues that we can generate revenue. Are we providing services for free to any residences on these trees, bushes, etc., things that are being infected, being removed, or does strictly our arborist area only take care of city-owned property?
Microphone, Mike. Microphone.
Sorry about that. I wouldn't say that the services are necessarily free as you know, as a franchise, or not a franchise, but as an enterprise fund. You know, every, you know, household would be paying, you know, that monthly fee. So with that said, if an individual calls in and they say, hey, our city arborist, can you come out and look at a tree, give us an evaluation of that, you know, we are doing that as part of the function of our urban forestry division. Just like any other division of the department or any of our departments, you know, we're going out there and we're going to provide a certain percentage of professional opinions to the public. So that's just one example of what they do. And then other things, you know, tree planting, those type of things, you know, if they want to plant a tree in their yard and they call in, we'll help them with assistance on what type of tree in that area based on inventory that we keep, you know, we'll do those type of things. But as far as going out and doing tree maintenance on their property, no, we do not do that, just on the street right-of-way trees.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. That's what I was looking at, was to see again too, are we providing services that go beyond what would be a normal municipalities, just being a good city, obviously, and providing those thoughts and ideas, or are we providing services? So again, too, as we're kind of going through, right, each one of these line items and realizing where we're spending our time and so forth, I didn't know if this was an area that, you know, we're putting a lot of payroll dollars to something that should be something that we, you know, should be recouping. But from what I'm understanding to you, that is not the case. So I was just double checking. So.
And I think what Lon is saying is that that additional position is got its own funding source.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be added.
Yeah, like the road use position as well. The road use position, we can't take road use dollars and reallocate those to hire patrol officers, for example.
Right.
So those are ones that are kind of in their own silos. They're in their own business units with restricted use of those dollars. So they're separate from the ones that are the overall discussion for the general fund.
Right, okay, thank you.
Different bucket.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. First of all, as far as talking about not adding any police in the next budget year, if I'm understanding this correctly, we are adding one more policeman on the road. With adding the evidence clerk, that's becoming a civilian position, so that sworn officer is now not doing a civilian job, is now getting out in the field. All right, so to me, that looks like we are adding one out in the field as a result of that.
But we're adding a clerk back in. The position hasn't been eliminated, we're just trading, correct?
We're putting a civilian in place of a sworn officer.
So we're
Now
not
the
putting,
sworn officer, instead of handling paperwork,
That
right, but
is
we're not,
now out on the road.
that's
That
correct,
officer
but
goes
we're
to the
not,
street.
Huh?
Yeah,
It's
that
out on the
officer's
street.
gonna go, that position will go to the evening shift. They'll bid, he may end up on days, but that position goes to the evening shift.
Right.
Yes, in patrol.
Now a person's on patrol, whereas
Instead
currently
of
that
putting
is not
boxes
the
on the
case.
shelf, he's in patrol now. Yes, sir.
Yes.
So there will be one extra person
So
available for
technically one,
patrol.
Correct.
Okay.
And for me to remove the supervisor from the shift minimum, it takes 3.
And as far as looking at the future, I know Joe's been putting in a lot more work and looking at using your analytics and a lot of the detail and information there. And again, I don't believe it absolutely makes sense just to always increase positions based upon increase in population. I think your analytics has to be the driving force for you adding people. That's been your promotion, that's been your statement to us on how you're going to add people, where you're going to add them so that you're putting them in the right place. And on an overall picture standpoint, since this has kind of been brought up, I'll throw it out now instead of saving it for later. Instead of talking about adding to this deficit, it'd be certainly my goal that we eliminate the deficit and have a flat levy rate from the current fiscal year. So I'm not looking at adding to this deficit in any way, shape, or form.
Sure. And just real quick from my perspective, just in adding the staff, what I'm trying to do is to get the supervision that this department needs at different levels in the place where it historically has not been. I just wanted to put this out there. I'm very sympathetic to other departments and things. It's my job to try to pursue to get what I feel. And I haven't said a word. It was council that brought up the need for
Right.
based on what I presented at strategic plan. I'm looking through here and if I need to delay buying cars next year, I don't know how that affects the budget at all. I mean, that's over $150,000. Maybe we don't buy cars next year. Maybe we don't buy the camera. Maybe we don't buy the LPR. I cut a lot initially from our capital replacement program. I cut a lot from there. I'm trying to go to the 911 board. Acquired almost $250,000 to go toward costs. So I'm trying to be very conscientious, and I just don't want my peers here to think that, it's me or the highway. That's not the way I operate. So I appreciate the council's positions. I appreciate what Lon's trying to do. So I'll just leave it right there.
And just to iterate though, Steve, one of the things that raises a flag for me is when you talk about a flat levy rate, because the CIP contemplated an increase in the levy to fund programs in the CIP. So if you're now saying that you want to hold the levy rate flat, that means that the other levy rates have to go down in order to fund projects in the CIP. That's going to put a lot of downward pressure on the other operations that we have that are funded out of those other levies. So when I approached this, I looked at it and said, okay, Fire Station 3, the new headquarters station, I look at that as being something that has to go above the existing levy, that there would be an increase in the levy to make sure that we're funding those capital projects. If you're saying that the goal would be to maintain a flat levy rate, then we aren't going to be able to complete the projects that are in the CIP projected going forward unless we are then going to be talking about making reductions in other general fund expenses.
I'd probably be considering the latter.
Okay. anything to add? Yes, sir.
So, two things. First, I picked on financing because I can't see her because of the screen. And second, so earlier, excuse me, you said you're keeping the percentage at 39% to, what, I mean, if it went to if we said, okay, let's go to 38, would that, add a extra patrolman, or would that keep our levy rate flat? I mean, that's, if we go to 37, I mean, that type of thing, is that, I don't know what 1%, how much money that is. Well, maybe I do, but I'm not a good at math real quick, so.
For that one, I'd have to defer to Zach or Leanne to see what that difference between the 35 and the 39 is.
Zach, you are getting a good workout in your first year, man.
Glad to be here.
Yep. And I hope I'm not displaying it, but I am this is one of those things where letting go of budget is very difficult.
You're doing very well, by the way.
These are questions that normally, yes, I would be able to answer off the top of my head, but I also knew that if I didn't back off and let Zach do it, that I would meddle,
Would've
and
quit
I would end
already.
up trying to take it back over, which defeats the purpose of having Zach. So there'll be cases where I'll have to defer to him to answer those questions.
Kudos to you, Lon.
What we hired him for.
And just real quick of note, I think since I've been here, as far as the data piece, I've produced more data, I believe, in my position since I've been here. The Cincinnati study, looking internally at how we're processing calls for service. So when you're looking apples to oranges with the one officer car procedure, with the way that we've changed the call prioritizations, it's not going to look the same. Even if we had historical data going back, it's about the supervision, it's about the officer safety procedures that we're putting in place to deal with the growth, where you need one officer, two officers, the way we've changed the responses, that I'm not going to be able to put on paper for you. And I need everybody to understand that. And that's part of the where I'm coming from with the supervision. We have a very young department that's going to be evolving, and they need supervision. And right now, those supervisors are answering 911 calls instead of being supervisors. That's why I need to get those shift minimums to exclude those supervisors. So the things that you can't measure with those metrics, but as a manager, you see with your liabilities and the way you're managing the police organization, we have to evolve in this community. So, and if we got to wait a year, you know what? The staff out there, we'll wait, and we'll do the absolute best job for everybody in here. We understand the needs of everybody else, and we'll do it for you, I promise. So make your tough decisions, but know that we're going to be there 100%.
Ready? Anything else on that topic? Yes.
I do. I don't have it right in front of me, but I know that there's quite a bit in, when we're talking just specifically about this, I have some bigger questions, but I'll wait until the end just in case they might get answered. So I've got a list, but we're ticking off. Regarding the conversation we're having right now, there's quite a bit of overtime, right? And so is that something that can help fund another position as well?
I would love to sit here and tell you that the overtime is going to go away. But what we have is we have a union contract. We have shift minimums where we have to fill positions. I had another officer that's going to be off the rest of the year. She's going to have a child. So from this point forward, she's off the street. I had a retirement this week. And in addition to the one that I have in the academy now, plus the one that's on break-in, I'm actually down 4 from where I need to be just for the +2 that we're trying to get this year. Overtime. The way we generally incur overtime is to cover for shifts because we have to allow people to take time off. And when we don't have the staffing, we have to buy the shifts back. Over the past couple years since I've been there, I've been utilizing overtime to make sure that I have at least 2 people in the communications center. That's not something that going forward as the chief that I'm willing to have 1 person in the communications center anymore. Fortunately, unfortunately, we've had individuals that have been on extended leave for injuries that I've been able to mitigate some of that. But if everybody all of a sudden got well, I would be expending overtime in the communications center until we got it staffed for a 2-person minimum. These extra events that we do, the runs, the special events, the council, every officer that you see here at council, that's overtime. For every session. So there's a lot I would love to sit here and tell you that I'm going to make that overtime budget go away, but I would not be telling you the truth.
That's fair. Right, the thought was, though, is if some of that monies could be shifted in and you were to get a full-time position to help what you're talking about, didn't know if that was an option, so thank you.
I think that'd be a great story for me to tell,
Yeah.
but it's not the truth.
It would have been solved already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There
Sorry,
might be you might be able to see a partial reduction in it, a partial offset, but as the chief said, we're not going to be able to avoid having it, because even if you put new officers on, those new officers are also going to have vacations, and the big thing that you can't control with is what happens when you do have that extended medical absence or something like that you just absolutely can't control. They are in a high-risk occupation, so stepping out of a patrol car can mean a twisted ankle or a broken ankle, and all of a sudden you're gone for 3 months. There's just pieces like that they're always going to have some bolstering in there for overtime to be able to cover those types of events. Now, if it was a dollar-for-dollar reduction, it'd be an easy decision, but unfortunately it's not. Fire department. Fire department is the second largest of the general fund divisions, and year over year we are looking at a fairly significant increase here, between 4.7 budgeted and about 5.2 that's expected. That'll cover the full cost of the firefighters that would be projected to be hired this year, and then has budget for the last round of firefighters that will be needed to fully staff that station. So the expenditures are going up. We will need to make sure that in succeeding budget years, a lot of the focus on this one is on staffing, but it would not reflect a complete year of the operating costs of the new station. So we're going to have to make sure that the FY21 budget has room in there for operating costs. Opening it, we're going to have to pay gas bills. We're going to have to pay electric bills. We're going to have to make sure that we maintain it and to keep the building up and running. So, I don't want to say that this is the last increase that you will see in the fire department budget because of that project, because the next piece will be the operating delta that we see between a 2-building operation and going to a 3-building operation.
Okay.
Questions on that one?
No questions?
So the Parks Department, I covered this earlier with proposed changes to staffing. This does include moving 2 permanent part-time positions over to the full-time line item. That's a fairly incremental change because, as I said, these were ones that were already eligible for benefits as permanent part-time positions, but it will add additional hours that are available for the department, the net cost of about $30,000. So expenditures are projected to go up. We do have every year, every time we add more territory or add more trails, Mike's department assumes more responsibility for those areas. In any given year, he's got a pretty good idea of what capacity he has for staff hours to be able to handle those. The biggest real threat with that one is as what happens if Indian Creek floods and all of a sudden we have to spend 6 weeks working on the trail to get that back in shape. So his department is vulnerable to things like that happening, but in general they're able to put together a pretty solid work plan. They do a lot of work in-house on our facilities, including construction. If you look at a lot of the small pavilions that have been put up in recent years, his staff has done that in-house. They lay a lot of concrete. They're very diligent about making sure when we're doing capital projects that they balance out what can we do in-house versus what do we need to contract out so that we can make sure that we're saving every dime that we can. It would include the deputy director position for the full year that we're going through the hiring process for that position now. The other deputy director position that was budgeted for the current year that we'll see the full impact of would be the one in public service. Both of those departments have grown considerably over the years and more kind of adopting the same model that the other departments have had with fire and police, library. We're adding that deputy director level position to help fill out their personnel. One thing I should point out is that with parks, if you were to go back, say, 4 or 5 years in the budgets, it's going to be really hard to compare parks to prior years because earlier than that, the Arts and Environment Center would have been broken out as its own budget, and that was actually combined back into the parks budget a couple of years ago. So if you run into a spot trying to look back in history and it seems like it's really far off, that would be a point at which that change was made.
Lon, if we could add one more to that, we also rolled cemetery for the most part. Most of it expenditures were rolled back into parks too.
The Recreation Division, if we're ready to move forward, handles all of our various parks and recreation programs. This is one where we've greatly expanded our offerings in recent years. We added a recreation supervisor position part-time 5 or 6 years ago and then moved it up to full-time. And they have done a lot of work to expand our repertoire of offerings. In most cases, there are some offsetting revenues for those, but we never cover... For basic recreation programs, it's very rare for us to cover 100% of the cost of offering a service. The Parks Master Plan does have a goal to be able to move towards cost recovery target in there, but it looks at the overall portfolio of fees. I think it's 50% that the Parks Master Plan wants to seek to be able to recover from those. We do have an events coordinator position that is, how many hours a week? 30? Half-time, about 20 hours a week, and we would expect to see that to start to drive utilization of our facilities. I know that's been a goal of the mayor, was to make sure that we are fully utilizing facilities like Lau Park and the stage in the Uptown Artway, and by adding that position, we're going to be able to start to expand our programming and offering and better utilize the facilities that we have such significant investments in.
Lon, can that position be offset at all by hotel motel tax or anything that would drive anything on the I don't want to call it the convention bureau, but I mean obviously visitors bureau or something to that effect? Is there any way to generate a revenue source for that?
Absolutely. When I talk about the 50% of hotel motel, 50% of hotel motel can be used for corporate purposes. So you can use that to build playgrounds or hire police officers or firefighters, whatever you want to with that. But this position can actually be funded out of the other 50% because it's directly related to tourism and indirectly related to overtime stays. So as that other piece starts to develop, I could see it going towards not only the costs of this position, but also being able to provide a programming budget. So if we want to start doing paid acts or even get into ticketed events, we'll be able to use some of that revenue to be able to provide some of those services. Our grant program has been pretty flat. I think as the other two hotels come online, we could potentially be looking at a tripling of or even better, of the resources coming into hotel motel. So it's going to present some tremendous opportunities for us.
And that position would allow us to potentially grow into future opportunities, whether it be from part-time to full-time or to expand along with that laterally.
Right.
I hope. Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, each year the Parks Department submits a proposal into hotel motel, and that's what's funded things like dueling pianos out at Lau. Those types of programs have been funded out of hotel motel in the past, and as that grows, we'll have the opportunity to present a lot of additional programming.
Lon, is the recreation budget, will it be impacted in any way, positively or negatively, with the proposed collaboration with the Y?
The long and short answer would be both. I'll ask Mike to elaborate a bit on that.
For the FY20 budget, is presented to the council as if scenarios associated with the Y are not included in the proposals in the FY20 budget right
Sure,
now.
that makes sense.
Looking at when that facility will come online, would almost be in the last quarter of the FY20 budget. So we developed the budget just as if that didn't exist for the FY20. Now, in future budgets, there should be probably the impact would be on the revenue side more than on the expenditure side. with what we're trying to model right now is that with the joint partnership, there would be a stream of revenue from programming, those type of things that would flow over into the city general fund. What we're still playing with a little bit is what that looks like from a staffing perspective on our side and the Y side. Operationally, everything will be done by the Y. It's more on that programming side where we got to play that a little bit. It's possible that it'll actually, in a future year, we're proposing for another recreation supervisor. There's the possibility in our modeling that will not be a need for the department in the future. It just depends on how we end up at the end of the day with the Y and that partnership. So we'll still have a need. You know, we staff heavily with part-time employees, and a lot of those programs will still require a commitment there with the Y. But as far as from that full-time side, we might be able to pull back a position depending on where we end up with the Y on some of those things.
Okay. Has that events coordinator position started
Mm-hmm.
yet?
Yep. Yeah, in January.
And it is under the Parks Department?
What's that?
That position's under Parks Department?
It was
Parks and Rec.
It was
Works with
funded in
Amber.
the current fiscal year in the parks budget. I believe that's going to move over to communications, correct, in FY20?
It'll be under communications. Okay,
Yep, she's already started and she's working with Amber right now.
great. Yeah. Okay.
Next, we have library. And this is the operating budget. This is not the capital budget. This is not the Marion mixed-use project. This is the operating
Like a
budget
great
for the library itself.
We'll take it.
As proposed right now, there's not a change in operating expenditures. We would expect to see some changes in operating expenditures, of course, with the new facility coming online. They have been doing a lot of work internally to reconfigure their organization. Ellsworth had kind of started down that line during his tenure as the library director, and that's been continued on under their current leadership. In the library world, there have been a lot of changes in operations, a lot of changes in expectations, new services being provided. When you looked at old job descriptions, they didn't necessarily match what people were actually doing, nor were they necessarily reflective of the expectations that leadership have of the people in there. And they are then, as the council saw during the joint session with the library board, looking at how they're managing their collection to make sure that that's right-sized towards the needs of the facilities. So I would expect that this one, while there's not a delta in this year, in the next fiscal year, we'd look to start gearing up towards expenses and staffing needed in the new facility, and then fully realize it once the new facility comes open. Does anybody have questions about that one? So here we have engineering. Engineering, there's no staffing changes proposed. We are seeing an increase in expenses and a slight increase in revenues. As we've talked about already, this is one of the areas that we will be taking a close look at over the coming year for the revenues that it has, because engineering has two separate and discrete functions. One of the assistant city engineers dedicates virtually all of his time towards new development projects, and then the other one is dedicated towards road reconstruction, management of those types of projects. So the department has a serious amount of resources that go towards managing those new constructions and expansion in the community. But much like the planning side of community development, there's not much revenue that's really associated with that from the plan review side. So we are looking at those, and we would anticipate that we would have some proposals that may come back to the council, again, looking at what Cedar Rapids is doing and wanting to be cognizant of not getting out of line with our regional market. We have to be a little careful with that, but I do think there's some opportunities there, to your point, Councilman Jensen, about bringing those revenues and expenses back in line. We do have those two positions that are funded out of lost. That's just something we need to keep an an eye on. We want to make sure that, we're not positioning ourselves, as I said earlier, to have a revolving door in those positions as we get closer to the expiration of the local option sales tax. Some of these are a little bit smaller, but streetlights and traffic safety, that's two separate pieces related to the operation of the city's lighting system. You have the streetlights, and then you also have the traffic signals. So this pays for the expenses to operate that. We have electric bills that we have to pay for the operations of those. On a leased pole, it's a monthly fee that's set according to the cost that the utility charges. For a pole that's one that we own, like the ones in the uptown, they are metered, and so we're paying actual electric consumption. There's a little bit of a trade-off there where you own the poles, but that means you're also responsible for ongoing maintenance and upkeep versus one that Alliant or the REC puts in, where if it goes out, you just call them and they take care of it. So with building inspection, we are showing an increase in expenses over budget. The budget for this year did include anticipating at some point during the fiscal year bringing another inspector on, funded by those licensing program and rental inspection fees. We haven't implemented that yet, so we haven't brought that position on, but we would expect to realize that for a full year in inspection. We're showing it here as a housing inspector. I think their intent would be to hire an inspector, and then maybe it becomes their primary assignment, or they continue to do some of the things that they have now where they have someone that might be the lead on housing, but then other inspectors are able to fill in as they're available. I know they like to have everybody cross-trained, and one of their goals is to make sure that everybody's trained to the highest level that they can so that everybody can continue to do all of the different types of inspections under their purview. So we would show this one, revenues vary some. As I said earlier, some of those really big projects can be six-figure building permits. While we keep in communication with agencies like the schools, we never know for sure, are you going to pull that permit in June or are you going to pull it in August? So we do our best estimating on that, but it can vary some from year to year.
Lon, I'm sorry, I had a question about I just thought of it a moment ago about the streetlights. As we build out, for example, in the uptown area, are we having a tendency to lean one way or the other as far as ownership on poles going forward, or is there a recipe there that we own so many and pay a service or lease them going forward?
Most of the places where we own poles are what I would characterize as our signature streets, the ones where, we're trying to create a certain impression or fit them in with a streetscape. So you think 6th Avenue, you think 10th Street going north, 35th Street, areas where there are larger streets, ones that have higher traffic counts. When you get back into residential subdivisions, it tends to be more economical to just use the standard offerings that are provided through the utilities. Each one has a little bit different offering, but it's generally up to the developer which one they choose to put in. I don't know that the lease cost varies much for us depending on if they choose a higher or a different looking pole versus the other one, but I can't think of a situation where we own them back in residential areas. I think we do own them in the MEC, as I recall, as well.
So going forward, we'll continue to have a mixed use of streetlights throughout the community. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of that's driven by our streetscape designs, but big high visibility corridors like Tower Terrace, again, those signature streets tend to be the ones where we own the poles. The standard utility offerings just don't get into that level of structure where you'd really have some of the options. For example, I don't know that they offer a pole at all where you can do like we have on Tower Terrace where it has a street light on one side and then a trail light off of the back.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sure Mike and Ryan could tell me which ones they offer and they have that. Planning is proposing adding an internship through the summer. That's not a very expensive position for us. I think about $4,000, Zach? in that range, to have allow for an internship. We are taking a look at the structure of that department to see if it makes sense to reclassify one of the positions. One of the positions has been handling, I would say, a level of work beyond what you would normally consider them to be responsible for. So we're going to take a look at whether or not it makes sense to reclassify that one. We have one principal planner in the department, but that's related to current planning. This would be a principal planner position related to advanced planning or future planning.
Can I just ask a general question?
Sure.
In the past, if I'm remembering correctly, when we've done these meetings, you've given us like, let's say Joe asked for X, this is what you're putting out there. Why are we not seeing that now or anymore?
You mean the request versus what the recommendation is?
Correct. Thank you.
Those are included in the sheets that you have.
Here.
Where? A request is on
Third
here?
column second column from the right.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep, I see it. I see it. So the requests and drafts there. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
We were trying to clean up the slides a little bit.
Got it.
One of the observations that some of the folks in the room had made is that with those numbers being small, this was intended to help with the squinting issue too, but some of them were very hard to read when you were putting that many across the top.
This is my squinting issue. Trying to read this thing. Can I borrow your glasses?
Sure.
Thanks.
So with the city manager's office, you'll note the note up there that there's not trend data available. That's really due to the reconfiguration and bringing some of those other functions into the umbrella of the city manager's office. For example, I'll pick on Rachel since she's right here to my left. The city clerk can really be housed in finance or in city manager, but in cases where it's housed in the finance department, usually you have a combination position where your finance director is also your city clerk, and that's not the case here because the city clerk is a separate position. In addition, the bulk of the agenda management work tends to happen in the city manager's office, and that's a primary responsibility that the city clerk has, and so we folded that over in my direction. So because of that reconfiguration, it would be tough to look at the budget from last year and compare it to what we're proposing in there going forward. The two positions that are in there, we took the HR director out already, and then we have that city attorney position, but one of the requirements for doing a city attorney is that we would really only do that if it would be a net neutral change or a net positive change to the bottom line. We do have a budget in there for the citizen survey and for some enhancements to our overall communications program.
I got questions on a few line items.
Sure.
Can I ask those now? On your long-term disability, line 6153, you got $96,000 compared to prior year's budget of
1,900.
Yeah, 1,900, 1863.
Yeah.
So that's like what's
Yeah,
happening there?
It's a big difference. One of the things I found is this is the first budget that we're starting from the forefront in modeling in New World. So the positions are actually based in New World. One of the downsides, the way we currently do that modeling is we don't pull the long-term disability per person. So in order to get that number in there, I put in a plug for one number in there, so it hits the entire general fund. So right now, that's the entire amount for the organization that I have as an estimate for the organization as a whole. Because if you look per person, and one of the things I'll prepare for the next draft, because I think it'll help with some of the clarity, is to have the position breakdown too, for the positions to see the differences there. But right now, the positions themselves don't have it. So this is the one number that represents that value for the organization.
It's a one lump sum for
Correct.
all of them.
So in draft 2, will it be broken out?
Yes, that's the other thing I'm looking to do is to break it out by department, because right now it's in one placement. So in the general fund as a whole, it will hit the general fund total line there, but it really needs to be allocated out appropriately to each department. And that's one of the things in the next iteration that I'll be providing. Yeah, but you're right, it shows up very quickly, because, yes.
Okay, and then on the next page, and maybe this is what you were talking about here, advertising went up from 5,000 to 29,000. Is that for the citizen survey? Or where's that?
I can open up the transactions to confirm that. And what account line are you referencing?
6402.
6402? Okay.
That went from 5,000 to 29.
Oh, please.
It might actually just be the publications from the city clerk that moved over from finance city clerk to city manager's office. All of the legal publications that we do in the newspaper.
So another line would be reduced somewhere?
If you go to 101, 620,
Yeah. Looks like what Rachel was just pointing out is that in the finance one, there's a corresponding decrease.
Okay.
and I'll take responsibility for a lot of the confusion because I held back on creating a bunch of new org sets until we knew exactly what that org structure was going to look like.
Yeah. How about the next line? Contracts, technology service, 6,000 to 22,000.
Yep, that's, looks like Laserfish membership. And annual maintenance. Again, that one's probably moving over from one department to another.
And then contracts, other services went from 6,000 to 50. Is that similar? So, and then you're moving. I'm just saying these kind of jumped out at me because there were pretty significant increases on all of these lines.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things related to, I mean, the citizen survey alone is 21,000, and that's something that we do every other year, so that would be included in there. And then, excuse me, it looks like the other initiatives that are proposed under communications are moving over. We're just looking at the line items that are, the transactions that are underneath it.
Okay. And then events and meetings, 2,000 to 26,000. Is that the event coordinator?
If you look at
No.
the finance one, they're all coming out of finance.
They all are?
I'm looking at finance.
Okay.
Yeah, 20,000 is for the events coordinator.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So with finance, they're always the big winner on the revenues versus expenditures side, but that's because property taxes get booked as revenues underneath finance, so it makes their budget look really, really, really good. Makes the rest of us look like we're deficit spending like crazy.
Who profit center there?
But
Can you do that 3 times a year?
again, much like the city manager's office, because of the realignment of where staff positions are going to be reflected, this is not one where you're going to be able to look at trend data from prior years and really be able to see, okay, how does what they were doing last year compare to what's going to be happening in the coming fiscal year. We do have the accountant position reflected in there. Finance and IT are both here in this draft, but those will be separated out. I don't know if we'll be able to make that happen by the time the second draft happens, or if that might have to be a next fiscal year initiative. It just depends on how much we can get accomplished between now and then. And then here's the one that you were asking about before, why the legal budget was being reduced so dramatically, and that's looking at being able to bring that contract current contract services in-house with that city attorney position. Again, I know that that's been something that we've been on the cusp of it making financial sense for a while. We just want to do a deep dive in it, and we'd come back to the council with more detailed information about does this make sense. But either way, it's reflected in the budget. We would just be moving from one line item to another if we do end up having to stick with the contract model.
All right.
And legislative, this is your budget. This is where we reflect the items related to council. It's not just council itself, though. Realistically, the city council is actually a very small part of the legislative budget, but this is where we account for a lot of the contracts and the community support that we provide. So funding for Medco, the Chamber of Commerce, Transit, all funnel through the legislative budget. We do have funding in there for some strategic planning and dashboarding software. We've had, as an initiative, one that we've wanted to work on, going to agenda management software, so that would be included, and an anticipated wage increase for the council. The policy change that was done for council 2 years ago says that the council wages will be adjusted towards CPI. I think it's the CPI published in October of every year. So I think this last year was around 2.2%. Now, one thing that is not included in this draft budget, but I got a preview of, is I do anticipate that Medco is going to be doing an ask of the city for increased operating support. As I recall, I don't think we've changed our operating support to Medco since their initial capital campaign when they split off from the chamber, which would have been 2007, 2008. So they have dramatically increased the level of services that they provide. They've increased their staffing, increased the profile of Marion, but they've done that all on their private contribution side. So I know that on their overall budget, we used to be about half, and now we're down to about a quarter. As they launch into their next fund drive, I think they would hope that the city would look at the value that that organization provides and consider an increase, and then they would use that as part of the challenge to the community to go out and match the city's additional contribution to it. With that, I'm not going to say it's revenue neutral, but we do allocate those costs out now to the benefiting TIF districts. So it's not a case where it's competing with other things like public safety expenses or anything like that. It's got its own more dedicated source of revenue. Same with these other ones, transit and NTS. Those are funds. Those come against the transit levy. And then the other ones are general expenses.
Well, plus I think related to that, when we had the presentation for the EDC, I think it was our recommendation that maybe that should be funded through Medco, not through the city, because they're really more in tune with what should be happening there. So anything we would ever consider there, should be funded through them as well.
Yep.
And I think they are considering that. What do we normally do for the chamber? I'm trying to think, and that all comes out of hotel motel.
The chamber usually applies for and receives a pretty substantial amount of hotel motel, and then we are a chamber member, so we have a membership in the chamber. We fund Main Street out of here at $26,000 as part of their. Yeah. If I remember right, they have to have a third for their finance formula to stay accredited as a Main Street, and then we allocate $70,000 currently towards Medco. I think our chamber membership, it's driven by budget and number of employees. It's right around 1,300, I think. Yeah, 1,375.
Okay. Just thought it'd be good for everybody to kind of
and then
have that perspective of what we do for all of them.
Yeah. They, I think in this last year, they got awarded either 54 or 57,000 out of hotel motel.
Okay. And that makes sense because they use a lot of that for community events and drawing people here. So, yeah.
Yep.
Lon, what did you say the 28 agreements would fall into under legislative? What is that?
That would be transit.
Oh, the transit, okay.
Yep, that's the circulator route, the big buses.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
One quick question, good follow. So I see that line item, I missed it before, that's going from 640 to 488. What is the main change from 19 to 2020 on that line? That's down 152,000.
Let's see what other 2080s
Because
are.
it went way up last year compared to the prior years, and now it's going down. So has something changed? Maybe related to our sewer agreement, or?
We're thinking there might have been some things that were not, some other contracts that were included in that line item before, but this might be more focused. Let's see what we had.
Oh, you've got contracts, other services went from 2,000 to 188. So the two numbers are pretty similar together. Did you just break out a line item?
Yeah, this was one that, for example, before the Economic Alliance membership, the Medco membership, those were included. Those got moved over to a different line item. There were a bunch of them that were included there that we moved over to, which contract? To the other, contracts other line item.
So some of them weren't really true 28E agreements then?
Right,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. So it was really they were misclassified last year.
That would be a Leanne error again.
That's why she needs another accountant, Randy.
I don't know if you can lay that one at Leanne. That might have been one where I told her to book it.
I can't see it.
Oh,
Yeah, she's making a face.
You don't want to see her. She's mad. Well, it looks like legislators are nice and healthy, so that's why we like it.
Yep. So cemetery expenditures, cemetery, basically with the cemetery, we contract out all of our mowing services with that, so that's just whatever the number ends up being from year to year. Usually they try to do multi-year agreements or give us the ability to renew them for a period of years when we put that out. We've had the same provider for a number of years. I don't know how many, if you can remember, Mike. But having been in a city where we did that internally, this is what I would have expected for a budget for weed whacker string. You'd be surprised how quickly headstones will chew that stuff up.
A very labor-intensive process.
Yeah. Next item then is the swimming pool. The swimming pool is a general fund expense. This is one that does vary a little bit from year to year. As time has gone on and as it's become more aged and as we've had more competition out there in the market from newer facilities, we have seen a decrease in demand for the pool. The other thing that will tend to affect this one is what do you anticipate for open days during the season for the pool. So that's one that they take a very close look at to make sure that we're being realistic about it. It always runs an operating deficit. It's never going to bring in the revenue that it takes to be able to make it self-supporting. I think that now there might be a few out there across the state that get to that threshold, but they are ones that are much, much newer and have a lot more of those water park features associated with them. And even with those, it'll be interesting to see as new things come into the market and as consumer demands change and there's more competition with other newer stuff, if they're able to sustain that.
Is there anything we can do with the current pool? As I know the new water park we're talking about is years down the road. And I know this is an old pool because I remember the old one at Thomas Park. But is there anything we can do here to make it a little more enjoyable for families to come there?
We did do some improvements to the pool a few years back where we did add some amenities to it. With the bowl, the main bowl of the pool, I would not propose at this time that we would do a capital project comparable to Cedar Rapids, where they went in and they upgraded and they converted over to zero entry depth, those type of things with their pools. I think we're at the point where we're getting closer to that, what we're going to consider that end of life of the current swimming pool. To do a capital investment like that would not be appropriate when we're looking at future aquatic center. Amenities that we were able to add, we did umbrellas, lounge chairs, some slides, those type of things. realistically, that's about as far as we can go with the current shell of the pool that we have. The pool itself, condition-wise, we're always going to have some mechanical issues, those type of things, but overall, it has aged well. It's been well cared for. But my opinion at this point, we would not want to do a $300,000-$400,000 capital improvement projects to a pool that we'll probably be looking at. I would imagine this pool will close sometime within the next 8 to 10 years.
Okay, so at least we've added some shade. I know if you go to a pool, you need some shady areas. At least having some slides are essential today.
And we expanded the commons area. We moved the fences back to provide for that. So, but again, that's about as far as we really can go with what we have to work with at the existing pool without getting, like I don't want to keep repeating myself, but without going into a large, major capital improvement project.
Okay.
Did we get the heater fixed?
The heaters, yes, the heater was.
I heard more complaints about that.
Mike, what is the capacity of utilizing the parking lot out there? Are we now oversized for the usage of the pool that maybe, and I'm not looking at spending more money, but can we take some of the asphalt up and bring it back into more of a park setting closer to the street? That would be, I'm trying to kind of shirt tail the comment here of utilizing it for more than just the pool itself on that location.
To the parking lot itself, it depends on the day, weather conditions, those type of things. You know, if it's very warm out, we can fill the parking lot still. Typical average day, we don't see that anymore with our usage and what's going through the gate. And with that said, to remodify that lot, right now, it's not, an expenditure, if you will, to have it as is. I think as part of when we get into the aquatics feasibility study, and we start looking at a new aquatic center, repurposing Willowwood Park, what that looks like, I think we need to take a look at that before we would do anything associated with parking lot. What could that park be in the future? And I think that would be the trigger that drives, that whole conversation of the parking lot, the grounds around it, what can we do to recreate that park? That makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. And I was just that's exactly what I was looking at, because I was just thinking, if we took part of that, part of that west parking lot out and turned it into a more of a park setting, that we would utilize more of the area, I guess. Right now, it's you either come to the pool or you don't, and to me, it just looks like I'm seeing an empty parking lot out there the majority of the time, and I thought maybe a park in the neighborhood might be a little bit more on the street side. I know there's more room to the back, but again, just trying to capitalize on some of the space that we already have, so.
And with that existing infrastructure being there, that's why I say, that we need to kind of hold off, not pull the trigger on something like that at this time. I mean, one of the things that I've thought about, could that possibly be a year-round farmer's market, associated with the park? And there you'd have that in, some upgrades to the parking, but the bones are there in the infrastructure, if you will. Right. So that's just one example.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Next one, in the grand scheme of things, is the Arts Council. They have a fairly small budget, but it's an organization that has a very large impact for the amount of budget that they have. I know we always like to put this out there, but the amount of volunteer hours that they contribute to the city accounts for more than a half-time person each year, which is just utterly astounding given the number of years that they've been able to sustain that. And budget goes towards events that they do. They often do produce some offsetting income for the events that they hold. It's just a great group to have helping us utilize the Arts and Environment Center out at Lau. Civil rights is a fairly new endeavor for us. After Marion crossed the 30,000 population threshold, Iowa code requires that we have a civil rights commission, so we created that and added that function. It's a volunteer group, unlike Cedar Rapids that has a full-fledged civil rights department with staff and everything. Ours is all volunteers and board members with some dedicated staff support out of the city manager's office. But our other services that we would be required to provide are done under a staffing agreement with the city of Cedar Rapids. The bulk of anything that would come to us for a civil rights complaint is still going to be diverted over to the state of Iowa to investigate. The only areas that we would be responsible for doing directly would be ones that are underneath our ordinance that are not necessarily in the state civil rights ordinance. So where we see most of our activity in this one is related to housing complaints, I think. And even with that, for a community our size, we don't get a ton. So good group. They do a lot of outreach for the community. The increase in here is due to some money that they're anticipating receiving out of our low to moderate income set-aside money that we're receiving from the Winslow Road TIF district. That's required to provide services that benefit low to moderate income populations, so it's not money that could be used for other purposes. But they have a small grant program that they have put together for that. Then health insurance. Health insurance, this is where we reflect our reserve funds and account for our expenses related to what I was talking about earlier, the under 30,000 medical expenses that get incurred during the course of a year. So this is one where we do maintain a healthy reserve balance just in case you have an unexpectedly terrible year. But when you see pieces that go against the employee benefits levy, anything that's not going towards our costs to Wellmark to administer our health insurance or to the stop loss premiums are going to be reflected here. We don't administer it. We don't write checks for individual claims. We do draws from Wellmark that I think it's weekly that we send them an amount, and then at the end of the month they'll do a settle up amount with us. Sometimes we don't have to do a settle up payment. Sometimes we have to do a settle up payment with them. We do offer, for the first time actually starting this month, a buy-up program that is 100% employee funded. So if employees want to purchase additional dental insurance, they have the ability to do that, but it's all at their expense. The well-being budget comes out of here as well. The only change that we have for the budget side in that is that we're changing our vendor. And then the pension fund, this is a fund that has a bit of a history. Back before the state created the 411 system, cities that had their own pension systems that included Marion had maintained their own pension funds. And when the state took it over, they took over the amount that they felt they needed to make it actuarially sound for the community that they were providing services for. Anything that was over that, they allowed the community to keep, but it was a restricted use. So this one is one that we have been just using a little bit over time, transferring dollars into the general fund. It earns some interest that goes into the general fund to help buy down the cost of police and fire pension costs a little bit. $25,000 isn't much. We haven't really increased the budget amount from this over time because we didn't want to draw the fund down and deplete it over a couple of years and make it look like those costs were less than they really should be, but this does buy it down a little bit. And the Employee Benefits Fund has a couple of different purposes. If we know, for example, that we are going to have a retirement during the course of a year, depending on the position, they're entitled to different payments on separation, whether it's a certain percentage of sick leave or whether it's payouts of vacation, anything like that they've accumulated that they're owed at separation comes out of this fund. So it varies some from year to year. When you do an early retirement program that's It's very structured. You can kind of predict and know what those expenses are going to be, but not everybody tells us right away when they're anticipating that they're going to retire or separate, and so we budget towards what we think we will know about. The other function that it has is during those years where you have 27 payrolls that hit your fiscal year, this one helps to cover the cost of that so that it doesn't result in an unnecessary budget hit on the general fund side. So trying to make sure that we have a sinking fund in place for those contingent liabilities of separation costs when an employee leaves. And with that, that's about the halfway point on the expenditure slides. I wouldn't mind taking a little short break to let my voice recover a little bit, if you're amenable to that.
Absolutely.
How long of a break?
10 or 15 minutes? Is that all right?
How are we doing are we on track? Okay.
2:30?
Okay, so come back at 2:30?